They will be speaking. First, Professor Christine Korsgaard, Arthur Kingsley Porter, Professor of Philosophy in the department here, the author of Sources of Normativity and many other influential works in moral philosophy. Martha Nussbaum, Ernst Freud Distinguished Service Professor of Law and Ethics at the University of Chicago, visiting here this year in the Harvard Law School, author of many books, most recently Frontiers of Justice, Disability, Nationality, and Species Membership. Cass Sunstein is Carl Llewellyn Distinguished Service Professor of Jurisprudence at the University of Chicago Law School and also visiting at the Harvard Law School this year. He also is author of more books than I could name without keeping you here well past the 9 o'clock deadline, but recently and relevantly the co-editor with Martha Nussbaum of Animal Rights, Current Debates and New Directions, which came out in 2004. Our fourth speaker will be Patricia Herzog, who has a PhD in philosophy from the philosophy department here, who's been a faculty member in philosophy at Brandeis and a visiting scholar at Columbia University. She's the author of Conscious and Unconscious, Freud's Dynamic Distinction Reconsidered. So I'll turn the floor over to Professor Korsgaard, who will be followed by the other speakers without any further intervention from me.
Can you hear me all right? Okay. What does it mean to be an animal? About 600 million years ago, certain organic life forms on this planet began to wake up and become aware of their surroundings. They found themselves to be hungry and to be the target of unwelcome interest on the part of others who were hungry. And for both of these reasons, they had to work to take care of themselves. To prod them to do that, nature made many of them capable of pain and of terror. But some of them were also capable of the opposite feelings of pleasure and security. And out of these various feelings grew feelings of interest and boredom, of grief and joy, of family attachment and hostility to outsiders. These life forms are constructed in such a way that they cannot help but struggle to stay alive, and perhaps even to care about their lives. And a few of them know themselves to be, in spite of that, ephemeral beings. The organic life forms sharing this strange evolutionary adventure are the animals, and you and I are among them. This gives rise to a moral question. How should we interact with the others? Many of the moral problems that we talk about in philosophy are intended to illustrate the general features of ethical theories and don't come up very much in everyday life. At critical moments of your life, you may face the question whether to have an abortion or to terminate the medical care of a dying loved one. But few of us as individuals will ever have to decide whether to torture a terrorist who knows the location of a ticking bomb, although we may have to vote on laws that concern that question. And I'm willing to bet that no one in this room will ever have to decide whether to push a fat man onto the path of a runaway trolley, which is barreling towards 5 innocent people tied up on the track. But you make decisions about how you are going to interact with the other animals many times every day. You make these decisions when you decide which cosmetics to use in the morning, when you put on your shoes and pick up your handbag or your briefcase, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and on many other occasions that you may not even be aware of. Moral decisions about how we should treat the other animals are inescapable, and that's why it's essential that we give the matter some thought. There are two general sets of moral problems that arise about non-human animals. One is broadly ecological and mainly concerns the relationship of the human species with other species taken as a whole. The other set of problems concerns our relationships with individual non-human animals. These two sets of problems can overlap. Our growing population and the resulting encroachment on animal habitats is threatening the extinction of many other species. But of course, it is doing that by causing the premature deaths of many individuals in those species. But the solution to these two kinds of problems can also be, tragically, at odds. In order to preserve the ecological balance among various species, a balance we ourselves have messed up, we may be faced with the necessity of culling populations by killing off individuals. In order to reintroduce orphaned predators into the wild, we may have to supply them with prey to practice on, just as their mothers sometimes do. In my remarks today, I'm going to set aside the ecological questions, pressing as they are, and talk about the ethics of our relationships to individual non-human animals. In these brief remarks, I won't have time to say much about what I think we may and may not do. Instead, I want to talk in a general way about why we have duties to the other animals at all, and why these duties might not be as weak as many people seem to think they are. So why does it matter how we relate to individual non-human animals? Well, it matters because, as I've already suggested, many of these individuals are complex centers of subjectivity, conscious beings who experience pleasure and pain, fear and hunger, joy and grief, attachments to particular others, curiosity, fun and play, satisfaction and frustration, and the enjoyment of life. And these are all things that, when we experience them, we take to ground moral claims on the consideration of others. We think it is wrong when people kill us or make us suffer to promote their own ends, or when they separate us involuntarily from those whom we love. Is it wrong only because we're human beings? Why exactly would that be? Our own capacity for these kinds of experiences is firmly grounded in our own animal nature, and that's a point I'll come back to. So I take it that the burden of proof is on those who think that we do not have duties to the other animals. Our human nature certainly changes the way we experience pain and pleasure, attachment and grief, and life and death themselves in deep and important ways, and that affects the details of our duties to the other animals. But why should we think that these differences are ones that make it wrong to impose death, loss, or suffering on another human being, but not on another animal? What difference between us and them could make that true? Now, few people, I think, agree with Descartes' famous view that non-human animals are mere mechanisms with no form of consciousness whatever. But I think many people talk themselves into thinking that the other animals have a consciousness so dim and fragmentary that all that really matters is that we spare them unnecessary pain. Even if that were true, many of our present practices would be called into question. Experiments on animals that are wholly unnecessary, for example, like the testing of cosmetic products. But I don't think the facts bear the view out in any case. The biologist Thomas Eisner thinks that even insects probably suffer from pain, and there's evidence that fish do so as well. So should we believe that highly intelligent mammals and birds who lead complex social lives have no more sophisticated form of consciousness than a fish or a bug? The evidence suggests otherwise. Many mammals and birds suffer not just from painful sensations, but from stress and boredom and terror, and from being deprived of the company of those to whom they're attached, just as they may enjoy play and exploration and love and family and fun. I'm not asking you to take this from me, of course. It's an empirical question. Given how pressing the moral questions are, I would encourage everyone to read about non-human animals and find out what they are actually like. A growing scientific literature suggests that many of us have underestimated the intelligence and emotional complexity of the other animals. You'll be hearing about some of this from Martha Nussbaum. Now, many people would grant that the other animals are conscious and can suffer pain and terror and loss, and that this is a reason for compassionate treatment. But they also seem to think that this reason is very weak. So weak that it's outweighed by almost any reason human beings might have for killing the other animals or making them suffer, even as trivial a reason as that we enjoy eating them. What makes it the case that the reasons against inflicting death and suffering on human beings are so strong, and the ones against inflicting death and suffering on the other animals are so weak? It's common for people to think that this question somehow depends on whether there is some really big difference between human beings and the other animals. So philosophical defenders of animal rights or animal welfare often argue that there is no such big difference. They are, as we might call them, gradualists about the human-animal distinction. Now, I've already said some things that might make you think that I hold such a gradualist view about human and animal differences.